Okay. Let's hope she will find us. We are now, as every year, we will engage you in a conversation on security topics. Now, the whole day is whole day, and we've seen a lot of the presentations, and people maybe have their heads already full and so. But some of the questions are, never answered up until the end. So you guys have a microphone, and I will ask you kindly to just, since not all of the people were in the venue you were holding the presentation, so you could just say your name and where you're from and what was your presentation about, which venue, etc.
Story Tweedie-Yates from the USA, and my presentation was on protection against ransomware.
Ransomware, okay.
Lars, Hilse, Germany, and I was here in the main auditorium. So.
Okay, what is your presentation about?
The future of the internet and the digital market. I think the topic was exactly.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Paul Fremantle. I'm from England, and I was presenting here on IoT security and privacy, and ways in which it's broken and ways in which it can be improved.
Hi, so I'm Tony G. I'm from Britain as well. Yeah, I was talking downstairs about IoT and doing demos of my friend Kayla and my doll, who's nowhere near as good as Robbie, but she was still quite cool anyway. And yeah, that was me.
I'm Nick Sullivan. I'm from Cloudflare in Silicon Valley. My presentation was in track 6 about encryption, and I run encryption and cryptography at Cloudflare.
Good one, good one. So we have IoT, future, ransomware, cryptography. Let's focus on the simple things. Let's focus on future, if it's simple enough. Okay. One thing we just spoke about was actually the user in the middle of all of that. So let's take a corporate side things aside, and usually we and most of the audience is actually protecting corporate secrets, corporate data, corporate users, etc. But IoT, in that sense, it's actually driven by the industry. Why do I say that? We preach also a lot about, the product automation, marketing automation, production automation, business process automation, etc., etc. This automation usually has 2 components. One is some IoT devices and some connected things that just self-manage somehow or run from the computer. And another thing is, of course, the data, the cloud, etc. The user gets actually the final product, which is sometimes sped up, sometimes it's thoughtful, etc. Now, the thing is, the user actually today, I think he doesn't hold himself accountable for that. Now, there are bad guys, like the hackers, etc. We know they are bad. It's a simple thing. Volcano is bad and hackers are bad. So nobody actually blames them. They blame their security guys, the government, the producer, everything. So in terms of that, by saying that, do you really believe we are moving towards the situation where we educate the customer regarding IoT, regarding what he has to do, etc.? Or we should just forget about that and not try, it simply doesn't work, and let's focus on some standards and make IoT more reliable and stuff like this. So who wants to start?
I can start if you will.
Yeah.
I think that putting it in terms of blaming the user versus ignoring the user is maybe too much of a black and white situation. As a developer of a product, you have to really think of what the user experience is going to be, and having sort of defaults, insecure passwords, and a lot of the things that have led to the Mirai incident and all the IoT things that we've got is really. It's not something that you should necessarily blame the user. It's more of a statistics game. Not every person, as much user education as you're going to have, is going to know to do 5 complicated steps. If you start with a product and you make it one step and one required step to go from sort of an open, by default, insecure IoT device to something that someone can be made usable, that's sort of a middle ground. So I would say don't ignore the user, but make it as easy as possible for the user to make the right decision. And there's always a lot of friction in terms of getting people to do the right thing, but it's the responsibility of the product developer in a lot of ways to make it easy for people to do the right thing security-wise.
Okay, right.
Cool. Yeah, I actually kind of think the same. You know, as far as I'm concerned, the end users, I don't think it's their responsibility. As far as I'm concerned, it is very much the manufacturer's responsibility. You think of a car, for example. When you buy a car, you expect it to be safe. You expect it to have been tested. You expect that in a crash, you're not going to die unless it's a very, very severe crash.
But if you die, the car manufacturer is liable. If you die in a car crash, the manufacturer of the car can be held accountable for your death, which in the case of the end-user license agreement landscape, you don't have. There's a general get-out-of-free card kind of mentality, and I think that's one of the aspects that has to be changed as well, because we're having products shipped out, as we've seen with Mariah, which are essentially dangerous because they're misconfigured or it's unsecurely configured. And I think if we manage to get that side into the boat as well, I think the whole landscape would change significantly.
Okay.
I'll be brief. So when you leave your window open in your house or your car, people will break in probably because we understand the security requirements of a home or a car. And nobody understands the security requirements of the cyber world and cyber physical systems. Even all these smart people, there are going to be hacks we don't know about that are hard to protect against. So we can't blame users until we get to the point where there is a decent way of behaving. And at the moment, we're so far from that, you can't even think of it. So I think at the moment you're absolutely right. You can't blame the users at this stage. Obviously there will be some things users do that are stupid and make it worse. But at the moment that's just a tiny fraction compared to the unfortunately really stupid things all the manufacturers are doing. So we're way from any chance of blaming the users at this stage because everything else is so wide open.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, right. If we take now into consideration your example with the car, the driver of the car is actually accountable for any damage he does. Maybe he has insurance, maybe he doesn't. Now, in the car industry, as a product, there are certain steps. You have to, go to the car school or driving school. You have to pass exams. You have medical exams. You have eye tests. You have da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The car producer has to comply with European da-da-da-da-da, how the blinkers should look, what color, what size, how should it feel itself, NCAP tests, safety tests, etc., etc. So there's a whole bunch of things to be involved because it's so easy to kill yourself with a car. Now, if we take a simple device, we've had for 20 years, 30 years, a computer, like a laptop. I go to the store, I buy one, that's it. No trainings, no certification, etc. I start using it the next day. I maybe have some passwords, maybe don't have some passwords. I start downloading some strange stuff. I start replying to some strange emails. I have a ransomware by the end of the week. Honestly, because there are no. Now, if you think about that, it took us maybe 20 years to really start to develop more or less sophisticated tools, more or less sophisticated virus catching technologies, etc. And that's a computer. in IoT world, there's almost nothing. We maybe can protect the network. We have some firewall maybe in some router, and that's about it. So can you imagine that it will really take 20 years to standardize this process and educate people, etc., same as the car industry did that in maybe 50 or 70 years. So in terms of that, well, I don't know if we'll go to that white spot at all. So we will probably lay our weapons down and say, okay, I give up. The users cannot be taught, etc. Now, what is the regulation to make this security by design or educate or make a user-friendly interface in 1, 2, or 3 steps to make his device safe? Now, what do you think? Will it really take like 20 years? If it took 50 for car industry, if it took 20 for computer industry?
So there is actually already some work going on to kind of secure IoT. There's a group called the IoT Security Foundation, and effectively they are putting together a self-certification standard that says, you know, my device is secure. We've effectively tested it. We have the means to be able to update it in the future. So I think that does exist, but the problem is that it's not widely known at the moment that that does exist. And then, of course, you end up in a situation where you've got, you know, with the CCTV cameras of Mirai, for example, one device was vulnerable, and then suddenly there was loads and loads of Chinese knockoffs, which all basically use the same underlying firmware, and they're all vulnerable as well. And so those, of course, would never go through an IoT review or anything like that, because effectively they're just being made to chuck out the door. And that's where the challenge lies, I think, because manufacturers are building devices that they're building them on price rather than on quality, and so you end up in that situation where you've got rubbish devices just being suddenly part of this huge botnet.
Yeah, you're absolutely right here. I mean, even the big companies fail. Now, one huge company, producer of the cell phones, did a mistake, right? We know these exploding phones, etc., etc. The problem is that these cycles are so short, you don't actually have time to test it properly because the market is requesting a new gadget every next month.
So I think the reason that we're not going to take 20 years to secure IoT, or potentially we will, but we've learned a lot of lessons over the last 20 years. Some of the end games, I guess, of the last few desktop software security suites are things like auto update and code signing. So on the latest Mac OS, you can't, for example, run unsigned code, and that goes all the way down to the low-level bootloader, and this becomes a model of something that we actually proved out that we can do. Same with updating. So the first iPhone or early Androids, for example, you could not update from the phone, but this is something that the ecosystem has developed the techniques to do that. Whether or not fitting those kind of advanced techniques into small devices is feasible in the short term, or something that the software developers will be able to do is to be determined. But the technology, the model for actually securing our software, it has been developed in the last 20 years, and I think we have some solid plans or directions for us to go for IoT.
I mean, you guys had the spam house example, right?
Yeah, can you please say that again?
You guys at Cloudflare had the spam house example, which Matthew talked about at, what was it, Black Hat, right? So not even those devices are secure. I mean, we're talking about IP cameras that are set up somewhere, or CCTV cameras that are being set up here and forgotten, but these were devices that are regularly updated. So I think we ain't doing too well.
Yeah, so I do agree. I think there's a lot of good stuff on the internet that can be reused, but I think there are some big challenges too. So, for example, one key technology to make sure that only good code runs is something called the Trusted Platform Module, and the TPM providers are just they're so out of sync with the IoT world and with making their stuff available to everybody that no one's using it. And so, you know, there's a lot of technology that's out there that just is not used because it's too complex, it's not open enough, it's not published, there's no easy documentation. And so I think that, you know, the short answer is we could solve this problem in 3 years if everybody pointed in the right direction. In real life, I think your 20-year example is unfortunately much more likely. It's a shame, but that, you know, it's a solvable problem. I mean, obviously it's not, you know, there's always going to be holes and vulnerabilities, but basically solvable. But I can't see it happening at the current course and schedule.
Yeah. You see, the corporate stuff is one thing. People are, you know, protecting the data. There are specific solutions for monitoring, for preventive analysis, etc., etc. But again, people are bringing in these devices. They are bringing in their smartwatches to the offices. They are bringing in whatever the sensors, whatever the gadgets, whatever the power banks, whatever it is. The average bag of an average employee in an average company is quite full, including lots of gadgets. And of course, you might have tons of policies and so on, and people will connect these devices to the Wi-Fi's and nevertheless, even from the corporate point of view, we will have to, you know, learn somehow to control that. If I go to the bank and let's say I'm opening a bank account. So in my humble opinion, I understand that banks are safe in general. In general. If I go and buy a smartphone, I understand that it's actually as safe as it can be, but I, as a user, am the guarantee that I can, you know, protect it. If I go and buy some IoT gadget, I think I by default assume that this is not safe. So now, one thing is the pure PR of that stuff. So nobody on a association, national level, and so is not speaking that it's good, it's trendy, it will be there. We just have to, you know, make it more safe and so. But it will be our part of our daily lives. The average user in let's say 2020 will have how many IP addresses at home for his devices? Quite a lot. Now it's 2.5 per person, if I may recall that number. So we are actually looking at, I don't know, 50 billion devices in next couple of years. No? Yes. So now it's something 2.5 per person. So there's 8 billion of us worldwide. So maybe not all of that, but you get the numbers. You get the numbers. So at some point, I will have this strange feeling that I just want to shut the doors, shut the windows, and, you know, off it goes. So what do you think are the main tips for the security advisors, for the security personnel, to just prepare for that? For that tomorrow, for these billions of connected devices in his premises, in his space, in his network?
One thing I've heard a lot of times from even our own Cisco security people when they give customer presentations is visibility. And at least understanding what your risk level is and being okay with that. So for example, Rebecca Jacoby, who was our CIO at the time, she said, we're going to a model where everybody can bring their cell phones to work. And the people in the security part of Cisco were, this guy was tearing his hair out. He was like writing memos saying, this is going to be so risky, et cetera, et cetera. And he realized she wasn't asking him a question. She was giving him a mandate, that this is the way the workforce is going, deal with it. And so when he brings his security reports now to our CTO, John Stewart, they look at the visibility, or they look at the risk, and they're able to at least be comfortable with that risk because they have visibility. They know the devices, they have enough at least security technology on those devices to understand the level of risk that they're taking on as a company. And that's what they're comfortable with, to be able to allow employees to work the way they want to work.
Okay, okay, right. Any additional ideas, tips? Simple ones, make a second Wi-Fi network.
So I think there's two types of thing you have to be aware of. The first one are devices you know about that are actively connecting, say, to a Wi-Fi or that belong to a user. And then there's the implicit data collection. So I could walk into your office tomorrow and I could drop a little thing into the pot plant, and that could collect all the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi MAC addresses of all the people walking through your front door. And soon start to identify them and re-identify them and eventually de-anonymize them. So the challenge we have is just enormous. And I think you're right. The first thing to do is understand the risks. I think the second thing to do is to educate your staff on what they're doing, because they need that in their private life just as much as they need it in their corporate life. So if people are buying devices that are potentially going to cause them a leak or be endangered, it's risking those people's privacy as much as it's risking corporate privacy. So I think that's the thing, and I think you just have to be paranoid. I think that's the number one lesson, is you really have to be paranoid, because we're entering a world where privacy is not going to be the same ever again. Yeah.
Okay. Privacy. Right. Okay. From the audience, do we have any questions currently? Just raise your hand. I will bring you the microphone. No, look at these smiling faces. Okay. There are smiling faces. Okay. People are not asking any questions. Maybe we are not being controversial enough or something like that, huh? So, okay, let's go to the privacy. Let's go to the privacy then. What you said is it's not going to be the same as it was. Now, we might think it was not on that scale. So if I did something, maybe 3 people knew that, maybe 5 people knew that. Now the whole world can know that. And it's not the problem about secrets or skeletons in the drawers or something like that. But anybody who runs for the next president, from that perspective, is already dirty, because we have so much material, especially if in 8 or 10 or 20 years, the younger generation, they've been publishing everything. And I'm not even talking about agencies collecting data which we don't want them to collect, but so what actually is a privacy 10 years from now? What does that word means?
I think it means what we make of it, essentially. I think we need to raise awareness that this whole privacy thing is, or that we need to define privacy, and then we need to define for ourselves, everyone for ourselves, even the next generation and the one following that, what privacy is and what we want privacy to be. It has to be defined, and then it has to be written down somewhere, and then for all I'm concerned, there has to be a consensus about that companies and corporations living off data. I think the Watson's guy's name? Sorry. Peter? Peter, yeah. He made a very good point. A lot of companies are living off data, so it has to be provided in order for these companies like Facebook and Airbnb and so on and so forth to survive. On the other hand, however, I think we can't compromise too much of our privacy, because let's not look at the next person who becomes president, but let's imagine that bit by bit, we become more aware of the human genome, and essentially the human genome is taken as a base for insurance by the means that some lunatic wants to include it in a data chip inside your passport. Just imagine how much data that will be worth to insurance companies. So, I think it goes far beyond sharing pictures of you throwing up totally pissed in a bar somewhere, and real sensitive data being just the fact that it's stored somewhere. Its value is so significant, its monetary value, that I think the discussion about privacy has actually just started.
Yeah, but will it really be so worthy? Are we not devaluating it already and giving it all away for free? Even if we sign some SLAs or something like that, there's, cars are gathering information about us, our weather stations gathering information about us, some Wi-Fi gadgets are sleeping sensors, running sensors, pulse sensors.
Yeah, but you know what you're buying into.
I just simply don't remember where I said, okay, I'm giving away this information.
Well,
it will cost you €100 a month.
It's in the EULA.
There's no value for me.
It's in the EULA where I said earlier today you could put a copy of Mein Kampf and nobody would realize it. And it's in that EULA where you said agree, agree, agree. And it's just that point. We're too ignorant about it. It says everything in there. If you read the end user license agreements that you sign, which none of us does, essentially that is the get out of jail free card that you sign. And the same is going to happen, or at least we are at a stage where we can actually say, okay, I concur that this is something I want in return for, I don't know, my pulse data being I don't know, used for sports analysis or for my medical analysis or something. But imagine this.
Can you actually recall the cases when there was something in return? I mean, it's so cheap now. Nobody wants anything for that. Everybody's giving away everything.
But again, we have to differentiate between do we sign for that? Do we sign that SLA? Do we say agree, agree, agree? Or does this thing sometime in the future come state-sponsored? Like all of a sudden we have to give our fingerprints into our passports, and they're stored into RFID chips or otherwise where other chips inside the passport.
No, some systems already have all our fingerprints. I tell you what, if you ever travel across the ocean.
Sure, I know.
You can't do it without it.
I know the deal, but take us 50 years further and just imagine that for some dubious identification purposes, you've got your genome in your passport, your entire genome, and that's state-sponsored, and you ain't getting out of that because if you don't agree, you don't travel. That's it.
Yeah. It looks like you're right here. It can be the future.
So let me put this in a corporate context, since we've got a lot of people who are paid to be in that to be corporate security officers. So imagine you took the location, for example, of employees, and you as a third party could identify that all the top management happened to be in one place at one time. And this wasn't on their corporate agenda. This wasn't a known meeting, and then that you, or even better, what if you said, I see the top management of two different companies in the same physical location at the same time. I see a merger happening. I'm going to buy shares, or I'm going to sell shares, or whatever. So it's the unintended consequences of this data. What happens when you put different data streams together, when you put all this information together and then you suddenly say, I know Paul, so I'm diabetic, for example, and I have a blood monitor on me. If that information is then correlated with other information and my insurance company has it, I'm done for. So do you see what I mean? So these are the unintended consequences, I think, of all this privacy. So encroachment. And I can just imagine, I could sit here all day making up scenarios that are going to hurt companies when the infinitesimal data about their employees is suddenly available to their competitors. You can just imagine all the things you could do to harm your competitors, to understand them, to get advantage over them. So, this is the world we're moving to, and I think that unfortunately the Mirai attack last week, it alerted us, security professionals and IT professionals, and it bothered a few people in the east coast of the States, but it still isn't what it needs to ramp up our awareness of privacy encroachment. It's a reminder, but I think unfortunately until we see the sort of, we've seen real attacks on the internet harming people. when we see that on IoT devices on privacy, then we're going to start waking up more. I think that's the world we're in, is that people haven't yet woken up to it.
So it's interesting, when you think about privacy, you've also got to define who's the owner of that data. And a real example of this, I was at a car auto conference, I think it was last week before, and there was a really interesting discussion point by a guy from a manufacturer, and he was saying, the challenge we've got is who owns the data that the car is generating. So you imagine a car generates huge amounts of data, like where it's been, the speed it's been doing that, what type of driving, what type of, whether, air conditioning in the car, about the individual, whether they're drunk. And some sensors they're putting in will allow them to really, really identify key details about the individual. Now, who owns that? Because cars now are really quite expensive, and nowadays a lot of people are leasing cars, so you don't actually own the car. Does that mean that you can own the data of the car? Well, I don't know. And then insurance companies might want to have that data as well, because the insurance companies want to have that for whatever reasons. And so, in terms of owning the data, it's very hard to say, look, I own this data. As the driver, I own this data, because actually you may not own that data, even though it directly relates to you. So in terms of defining a privacy policy, that's very hard. And I haven't got an answer for that, sorry.
Yeah, I know, but don't you think there is something a little strange about IT industry? Now, we've had two examples. Now, first one is, if I lease a computer, all the data on there, everything I do with that computer, everything I produce with that computer is my property, actually. Even if I lease it, it doesn't matter. If I lease a car, it suddenly becomes a different game. Why is that? Now, if I want to have an electronic service or something, I have to sign the license agreement that agree. Why don't I have to, sign when I go and buy cigarettes? Why don't I have to sign when I buy a car? Now, doesn't it correlate that we, the IT industry guys, including the legislationary, because legislation is usually not that aware about IT stuff, and they have the advisors and associations and committees on IT questions and so, because they don't know anything. We know that. So if the rules in IT world are for some reason different than in car industry or tobacco industry, then it's our blame, actually. We have designed that.
Well, you will be. That's the thing. The new stuff which is coming through from the new manufacturers, when you start signing that end-user license agreement, as you pointed out, to say, yes, I'd like to have access to the connected car capabilities, you're going to be signing an end-user license agreement at the same time as buying the car.
It's an IT product. If it has a screen, if there is an IT product, the IT guys who developed that somehow included that in the user interface.
So I think you said
it's not on the steering wheel,
So I think you said something really interesting there. You said that the legislature doesn't really understand it properly. And I have a great example of this. So I live in the UK, and in the UK we have a law that says that the government can demand your certificate, and not only that you have to give them the certificate, you can't tell anybody you've given the certificate. So you can't revoke it.
What kind of certificate is that? Can you
So my comparison is that, to me, that's like being able to give my signature away to a third party, a power of attorney, and not having any control over it, and not being able to tell anyone I've done that. Now, if you give your power of attorney in England, there's a whole framework to protect you, and it has to be published. People have to be made aware when it's used. There's the legislature understand how dangerous this is, and they've put in place all this protection to protect you. And then at the same time, in the electronic world, they've taken it away and just given it to the government, and you have no protection at all, because the people in charge don't understand. And unfortunately, the NSA and GCHQ kind of lie to them and say, oh, we have to have this for security, these are the bad things that will happen. And I think the same is true, that the car manufacturers want your data and they want to own it. And no one really understands what that means. So it's considered fine for them to publish this EULA and you sign it. So I think there's a big disconnect between the real world and the cyber world in terms of our understanding and the legislature's understanding in particular. And that really worries me. I think you really put your finger on it there.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so the government can ask you that, for example. So we have two guys from States, right? You are from Silicon Valley as well, and you are from which?
California,
from California, okay. So we spend quite a lot of time discussing, okay, the European Union has to really, tighten belt and go faster, where's our niche, where can we beat them, why are all the services are from the States, okay, we sign all that, but all the data goes to US, etc., etc. Now, how have you guys ever thought of, oh, we have this and that, and maybe in Europe something works better, or why don't we have that, or da. Any time? No, never.
That's a good question. I think the trust of the government in general is just it's a little bit different, right? I think over here there's maybe a little bit less trust of what the government's doing with your data, with anything. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head but I do think that there are definite just differences in how, in general, data is viewed, how we view government, and that reflects on a lot of these policies.
So, okay, so less trust in Europe for the government so people trust things less than in United States. Okay, it doesn't matter, is it technology or a car or a tree or...
So I would specifically label the trust to what is the government doing with the information they have about me. Are they using it to control me? Are they using it to do something else? I mean, we haven't had similar... Yeah, we haven't had similar histories in terms of the background in the governments. I mean, there's such a variety of government and culture here compared to the U.S., right? So we simply have not had the same type of things happen over there that have happened over here. So as a result, the public isn't thinking about necessarily the same things.
Yeah, I don't want to comment necessarily on sort of Europeans' view of their government or how much they trust corporations versus in the U.S. But I do want to say that some of the choices in the EU having to do with data protection and data physical boundaries around where data can go is somewhat counterproductive to the way that the internet actually works. So in some cases, for example, Cloudflare runs a global content delivery network. We have data centers in all sorts of different countries, and we kind of want to do things universally the same way around the world, but in terms of like what could be the fastest path to get data from, say, somebody in Germany to someone in the UK. It may actually, because of the way the internet's built, it might be faster to go through some other country, say in Asia or something like this. And I think the legislation has treated data as a physical commodity where
But it is a commodity. Physical, yeah, you're right here, but data is a commodity.
I agree data is commodity, but I think the metaphor is a little bit mixed in that it doesn't apply directly to how the internet actually works, and that can be somewhat counterproductive. And that's my comment on this.
Okay, right.
So that I'm sorry, I technically I agree with you, but what we're talking about here, privacy and security, this is the problem. This is the problem, is that technically something might be simpler and easier. And I'm not saying that the European laws actually are helping, but the concept of protecting your data and saying it should live within a boundary is not strictly the right way of doing it. But the intention is there, and if we as techies just do the simplest, quickest, most effective thing, that's why the 100,000 IP cameras were hacked, because someone did the quickest, simplest, easiest thing, which was to copy something that was already broken. So, do you know what I mean? I don't agree with you that just because it's sort of quicker. So, to me, the answer is, and of course you know this as well as anybody, to encrypt the stuff, the hell out of it, as it's in transit, and then it's okay. And the legislature doesn't really understand that. But if they understood that clearly and understood these things, then we'd be in a better position. But this is a real challenge.
Perhaps we should all go into politics and change things there.
So I used to hate politics, and then somebody pointed out to me, what is the alternative to politics? Oh yeah, it's war. So I'm less. I still hate politics, but I do at least see the point of it now. Anarchy is just multiple wars on a much smaller scale. So but yeah, I think it would be nice if the rules and the policy really match the technology. I thoroughly agree with you.
Yeah, we will have next year the new data protection law and so on, and the fines for not having it in a proper way are actually amazingly huge. No, these numbers are. I've never seen fines like that in any law actually. Not even in car producer cases or in some diamond industry.
But is it going to work? I mean, we had this EU law on cookies, right?
Yeah. Which
did nothing at all. It just meant everybody added a WordPress gadget to their system that said, click here, otherwise we can't help you. And that was it. So,
Again, it's
what you're saying is it's actually just made the matter worse. We have an annoying.
The same thing we know and we do well. It's actually again the SLA. This site uses cookie. By using this site, you comply to and we are not to blame.
Yeah,
right?
but look, Reinis, look, we ain't getting nowhere. I think we have politicians everywhere in the world, and they're what I so lovingly call and very diplomatically digital illiterates, and their advisors are not any of us either, but it's this club, and we ain't in it. It's a club where you pay, in Germany, for instance, they have this association, the name of which I've forgotten, where you pay, where you as an organization have to pay several thousand euros a year to be able to advise the government. So it's not really professionals advising the governments, it's money that's advising the government. And I think that's where the whole thing starts to fail. And the pirate parties had their fun here in Europe. I don't know how they're doing in the US, but here they're gone. They're totally out of the system. So perhaps a mixed approach would be something, and to actually get in and to actively start advising the legislative process, but professionally advising.
If we look at it theoretically, two things come in mind. Now, one thing is a good professional has to have money. So, does it make sense? But on the other hand, let's take a simple example we more or less know all about, which is Estonia. And their president, Ilves, which was on top of things, which was IT enthusiast, actually in these 8 years transformed the way the country, their citizens, etc., use electronic services, look at them, trust them, etc., simply because it came from the top. Because in this scenario, if we talk about security, basic understanding, demand for some e-services, demand for IoT in a proper way, there is not much demand from the bottom up.
But there's an interesting example, because he's pretty digitally literate. And so he can spot the BS coming his way.
Yeah.
So in the UK, we have this equivalent of the NSA called the GCHQ.
Yeah.
And they have told all the politicians, and they schmoozed some journalists who came to tell them about the holiest of the holy, which is this incredibly expensive randomness generator they've built that costs many millions and lives in a secure vault and is really important to the security of the UK and requires funding. And anyone who does cryptography knows that for about $100 you can build a pure randomness generator out of a fire alarm and a Raspberry Pi. And it's just as random as anything they have in their secure vault. Maybe it doesn't produce quite as many random numbers per second, but if you put 1,000 of them together, it still only costs $100,000, and it probably produces more. So it's very easy to confuse illiterates, digital illiterates, with mumbo-jumbo about this stuff and why it's important, which is why we have these laws saying you can have your certificate stolen from you, and we have a lot of worse laws in the UK on that all came in on terrorism that basically mean you have no privacy. And we all know that even without the laws, the NSA are spying on people. So it's very difficult unless you have a digitally literate president.
And it goes down to all of the levels. If I, as a product manager, go to the programmers and I say, I need this bug fixed, and they, 5 weeks. Okay. It's the same story actually at all levels.
I had a real case of that. I was working in a very large company doing software development. We had 2 labs, and we needed something fixed for a customer. And the other lab said it's going to take 13 weeks.
Yeah.
And we said, well, we can't wait 13 weeks. We'll put one of our developers in your lab under your control, but they'll do it and you can review it. And they couldn't say no. And so then the next week, I said, well, we need to make the arrangements for Tony to go and do that. And they said, oh, we fixed it already. It took them 1 day. Okay. And then they said it was going to take 13 weeks.
Motivation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay, dear audience, you have a final chance to ask a question, and we dismiss the panel. Who wants to go first? Okay. Good one. Saved by the bell.
Hi. So the question is, could you agree that all this awareness for the average people that don't understand the security and all that things could be started to implement in schools even because in today's applied informatics there is no such a topic about security and awareness about all those stuff?
No.
No.
No. I mean, look at who. If I look back and look at the people in my class who became teachers, I don't think they're capable of actually managing that kind of information. And I think then it has to go into the curriculum, which again is in a lot of countries kind of state-sponsored and gets developed by even worse digital illiterates than politicians. So I think that's going to be difficult. I think it's going to be the job of parents, actually, to get that kind of stuff done. We had a yes over there.
So you think it's like sex education, it's about avoiding viruses, is that what you're saying? It's up to the parents.
Essentially, yes. Now, I had the interesting experience of getting sex ed in a private Catholic school in the south of the United States. So, but I'm good. You know. Just want to say, avoidance can help too. You know.
So much for privacy chat, but
I do kind of think that there is a place for it in schools, but I 100% agree. Parents really need to do more, but the problem is parents are also illiterate when it comes to this. So where do you start? And the problem is you need to start somewhere. Parents don't understand it. Children probably understand about technology more than parents. So I have to say that I think the school is probably the only place where it can start.
I would also add that computer security education, sort of the consumer side, the awareness is one thing, but there's also developer education, and there's a real lack of computer security classes in post-secondary, and I think that should be a bigger, more important piece of computer science. Computer education should have a stronger computer security component.
I know someone who teaches children to hack, and they love it, firstly, and secondly, they become much, much more aware of security by basically becoming mini pen testers. So I think that's a pretty effective model of getting them more aware of what's going on. I'm going to stop on the sex education at that point.
So for the question directly, I think there's two scenarios, right? There's schools today, which I think everybody would argue we need more developers, we need more security experts. So schools of today obviously don't meet that need, and they do need education on just basic things like phishing. Just don't open an email from somebody who you don't know. I'm super paranoid because I'm in cybersecurity, but I wasn't before, and I have been infected before with spam or phishing. So then there's the other side. There's actual, as you were mentioning, developer education. So Cisco just last year has a new program around cybersecurity. I mean, just last year for our CCNA, our CCNENT programs. So we do have a long way to go in that sense. I just don't think we can do enough. Education is absolutely critical.
Right. Okay, let us thank the panel. A warm applause, please. A great question.